Welcome to Video Village. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to get ready to watch and talk about the latest movie out in theaters by the greatest movie star left on our planet. Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 is up next. This message will self-destruct in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So I saw Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 on opening night, and I loved it. I mean, this franchise is one that I have been in love with for at least the last 10 plus years. Pretty much ever since Mission Impossible 4 came out in 2011, I think. It's been a comfort movie and comfort franchise for me and my family. Pretty much on any rainy day or any time where you just want something to fire up on TV, just put on a Mission Impossible movie and just have some fun. And that's kind of where I want to start is I think that this franchise really is the most consistent and one of the best action franchises we've ever had, at least in my lifetime. A couple others I think are in the conversation are John Wick, which I can't comment on that because I've never seen a John Wick movie. It's a pretty big hole in my action movie viewing experience, I guess. But so that's obviously one that's really come into the mainstream, and this year John Wick 4 came out and was a huge hit for a lot of action movie fans, so I get that, and I'm sure that's up there as well. Other things, I think James Bond is one that I really want to talk about here. James Bond, I think historically obviously is much more important to the overall pop culture. I think that in the last... Basically, I think Daniel Craig's James Bond movies are so different from the rest of the franchise of everything that came before him. Daniel Craig's James Bond is a lot more serious, takes itself a lot more seriously, which I think is a great thing because his first movie, Casino Royale, is probably one of the best James Bond movies ever made. The third movie, Skyfall, I think is the best James Bond movie I've ever seen. But these movies are like prestige action dramas now. Skyfall was pretty overtly meant to get Oscars. They hired Sam Mendes, who had really directed Oscar-winning dramas and Oscar-nominated stuff until then, to make this movie. And Skyfall went on to get a lot of technical Oscars and nominated for a handful of others. And when you watch it, you can feel it. It's beautifully shot, and the story is the first one to kind of acknowledge that James Bond is getting older and James Bond is not invincible. It's the first one to talk about James Bond's past. All those things are very different from what the franchise used to be. And I think that's why it feels different when you go and watch a James Bond movie now. I guess Daniel Craig's done, but when you were going to the theater and seeing his movies, Spectre was not great, but No Time to Die I thought was pretty good, pretty fun. And that really felt like, let's tell a story about this character and really dive deep into his subconscious and what he needs to resolve, and ultimately, end this franchise with him. Mission Impossible is different. Mission Impossible started off as one thing and is now very much about what can Tom Cruise do on screen before he dies. And he will only die making a Mission Impossible movie. That's, I think, his final wish is if I'm going to go out, I want it to be doing a stunt for one of these movies. They're incredibly stunt focused. They're not really concerned with the character of Ethan Hunt, the main character Tom Cruise plays, and who he is really. I think earlier in the series it really was concerned with him, and now it's sure they'll introduce an aspect of his past to motivate his current self, but he is basically playing God in these movies. He's it's Mission Impossible, so he's pretty much invincible, but he's doing things that are crazy, and that even the greatest action movie characters wouldn't survive. And what they do in all these movies is they basically show that he's constantly failing. He fails pretty much the entire movie until the end for every movie, and obviously those failures are very, very fun to watch and very gripping, but he always ends up on top no matter what. And that's really the Tom Cruise narrative for everything he's done in the last 10 years. So yeah, I think Mission Impossible is like one of the most fun franchises out there. It's definitely, I think the last 4 movies have been some of the most fun movie-going experiences you can have, going to the theater, firing this up on the big screen, and just like witnessing this thing that they work really hard to kind of just make for the theater. And Tom Cruise has worked with director Christopher McQuarrie a handful of times in the last 10, 15 years. You know, last year they did Top Gun Maverick together. Christopher McQuarrie did the last 3 Mission Impossible movies, the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th, which is the one that just came out. And their main mission is not to like go win Oscars. Their main mission is not really to go make money. Really, I think their main mission is just like, let's make this movie that we're making the most fun experience that you can have in theaters. And that's what I think I am really attached to. I loved Top Gun Maverick because of that reason. I saw that movie 3 times in theaters because watching that movie in cinemas was so much fun. And like, it's Top Gun, and it's a pretty lighthearted franchise in general. And you know that like any of the drama that they show is really just to up the stakes, but you know that Tom Cruise is not going to die. He's Tom Cruise. Despite that, it was still so much fun and so gripping, and just like pure blockbuster entertainment that I love. I think as like Americans, we don't get enough good quality blockbuster cinema. I think we get a lot of shit. We get a lot of superhero movies. A lot of them sure could be good in the past, but nowadays are not really that good. We get franchises like Fast and Furious, which I think is terrible. I think the last good movie was the 5th movie in Fast and Furious. The 7th movie was one of the most popular because Paul Walker died, I think right around the time it came out. So I saw that in theaters purely because of that. And like, I can't say it was a good movie, but you know, whatever, it's Fast and Furious. The difference between Mission Impossible and Fast and Furious is that Mission Impossible cares about making something good, and Fast and Furious, frankly, is just bad. The action is mostly CGI in Fast and Furious, and whatever they do practically just isn't super compelling. The acting and the overall storylines that they're telling are like stupid in both. Like, they're not meant, I don't think Mission Impossible is trying to tell like some gripping dramatic story, but like they at least write a screenplay that has real stakes in it for the most part. And Fast and Furious just doesn't. And so I think it's like night and day between those two franchises. If you like Fast and Furious, I'm not like, go have fun. Like I get it. I just rewatched Pirates of the Caribbean because this is the 20th year anniversary of that movie. And that's one of my favorite movies of all time. That I love that franchise. It's like, it's got issues. It's not like incredible, but it has like pretty brilliant screenplay, and it has really fun action, really great actors, and was kind of concerned with like, let's make a good popular blockbuster movie that has quality attributes to it. And I think we've lost that a little bit. You don't get like Jungle Cruise was trying to do what Pirates of the Caribbean did, and Jungle Cruise came out, I don't know, 2-3 years ago. It was garbage. It's like, no, they're not trying to tell good stories or, you know, make good, compelling theatrical experiences so much as they're trying to use game plans that work. Let's keep making Fast and Furious movies. Let's keep making movies based on amusement park rides, and just not getting to the point of like, all right, let's make something that people want to see and rewatch over and over. So where are we at? Yeah, Tom Cruise doesn't die in movies. Tom Cruise doesn't do what he did when he made the first Mission Impossible movie anymore. Pretty much the last 15 years of Tom Cruise's career has been, let me now kind of commit to making blockbuster movies where I am kind of perceived a certain way, and like, I'm just kind of concerned about doing really, really cool stuff, and not necessarily about like getting good acting gigs. And that's like what we know Tom Cruise as now, which is a little bit sad because for most of Tom Cruise's career, he was not like that. Tom Cruise has been acting since the 80s and been a movie star since the 80s. He is often referred to as our last great movie star. I kind of have to agree in terms of like, he every 2 years is putting out something in theaters that makes a ton of money. He is the most bankable movie star out there. And for the most part, a lot of his movies that he's putting out, most of them are borderline, at the very least, very fun. They're really fun movies to watch. You don't have to think that they're like good quality or like good, prestige movies, but he promises to give you a good time and an entertaining experience. That being said, like, his work in the 80s and his work in the 90s was really, really, really impressive. Like, he was nominated for a handful of Oscars. He was in movies by a lot of really great directors. He's worked with Steven Spielberg. He's worked with Stanley Kubrick. He worked with Brian De Palma on the first Mission Impossible. He was in Rain Man, which won Best Picture, and he was nominated for an Oscar, I believe. I don't know if he got nominated actually, but his performance in that movie is great. Okay, so this is kind of like the highlights, right? So in '83, his big break was Risky Business. He was in a couple random smaller roles before that, but Risky Business in 1983, Top Gun '86, Color of Money in '86, which was directed by Martin Scorsese. He does Cocktail and Rain Man in 1988. Born on the 4th of July, 89, Days of Thunder, 1990, A Few Good Men, 1992, The Firm, 93, Mission Impossible and Jerry Maguire in 96. 1999, he does Magnolia, directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, and Eyes Wide Shut, directed by Stanley Kubrick. 2001, he does Vanilla Sky, that's a Cameron Crowe movie. War of the Worlds in 2005 is Steven Spielberg. Collateral in 2004 is Michael Mann. So, like, he is going out of his way to work with the best filmmakers out there, and he's really attracted to like good scripts but also like really charismatic characters, and there's a lot of charisma coming out of these Tom Cruise roles. That's like why people fell in love with him. I think like he does a handful of other movies in the mid to late 2000s. I really think though that the last time Tom Cruise did something that was fun and fresh and new and like kind of challenging at the very least was this isn't challenging, but at the very least was like something new, was Tropic Thunder. And he plays a character named Les Grossman, who's like an agent, and he has a fat suit on and he's wearing like fat hands, and it is a hilarious performance. Definitely one of the highlights of that movie. And that's really the last time. I mean, since then, he did a movie called Valkyrie, which I believe was the first time he worked with Christopher McQuarrie. Night and Day with Cameron Diaz. And he did Rock of Ages, which is like a musical comedy film. Jack Reacher, which was another Christopher McQuarrie movie. And then from then on, it's like Mission Impossibles. And I guess Edge of Tomorrow is like a really fun one in there. But it's not, again, that's not like a challenging role for Tom Cruise. He basically is playing Tom Cruise. But it is a fun movie. So yeah, like this whole run he's been on the last 10 years of just pumping out Mission Impossible movies and Jack Reacher movies and then like Top Gun Maverick. It's not him challenging himself and like trying to win Oscars. It's just like him attracted to like, let's go do really, really fun movies that get people in theaters. And by the way, if they don't work, like there's one or two in here that didn't work. 2017, he makes The Mummy and he makes American Made, which both were, I think, like not super popular at the box office. He like doesn't work with those people really ever again, which is like pretty crazy. So he's pretty serious about like trying to make good fun movies. Okay, that's what I have on Tom Cruise. That's what I have on why I like Mission Impossible. I think it's just really consistent and fun. Before I dive into Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, I want to kind of spoil that movie when I talk about it. So we're going to change it up a bit. We're going to do rankings first this time around. And then we'll take a break and we will get into Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Let's take a quick break and let's get into some rankings. Alrighty, friends, let's do some ranking. So there are 7 Mission Impossible movies, the first of which that came out in 1996, the 7th that came out just this month. Let's get into it. So number 7, I have Mission Impossible 2. This should come as no surprise if you've seen all of these movies. Mission Impossible 2 came out in the year 2000, directed by John Woo. John Woo is a very notable Hong Kong action filmmaker. He made the movie Face Off with Nicolas Cage and John Travolta. That's a really fun movie. I personally just didn't like this movie that much. It has a lot of fun parts. I love the opening. The opening is Tom Cruise free climbing a mountain, which becomes a theme throughout the entire franchise, right? Like he free climbs the Burj Khalifa in the 4th movie, does some free climbing in the 6th movie. So like I think there's still some iconic stuff in here, but like the movie's plot just isn't that enticing. The plot basically is that Ethan Hunt has to team up with a woman who I guess like kind of plays like a faux love interest that never comes back in the franchise, to stop a former IMF agent from unleashing like a biological weapon. The plot, like in most of these movies, is fairly like trivial. Like you don't really leave the movie remembering the details of like what goes down plot wise. That being said, like the story's moving parts just didn't feel compelling. Like I think a lot of the action was very stylized in a way that I didn't like it. There's a lot of like slow-mo and a lot of like slower paced action. And for like a 2-hour movie, I just found that it drags a little bit. So yeah, I don't have much to say about this one. Not my favorite. Hans Zimmer did do the score to this, which I found very surprising considering I don't really remember being attached to the score. It's also really interesting that like Tom Cruise did obviously like some of the stunts in the first Mission Impossible movie that we'll be talking about very soon. But he really wanted to do a lot of the stunts in this movie, and director John Woo was like very nervous having him do any of these stunts. And I think that was a big point of contention during the production of this movie. So like Tom Cruise does do free climbing. He did have a harness and like a thin wire, but there is no safety net, and that was Tom Cruise's idea and against the wishes of the production team. And there's another like final fight scene where Tom Cruise has like a knife being held to his face, and it's like a quarter of an inch from his eyeball. It's really close when you watch the movie, and that's a real knife, and Tom Cruise insisted that a real knife be used, which is insane. That's insane. Like when you watch this movie and you know that it's a real knife, it is 10 times scarier. Oh, I forgot to mention, the actor who plays the villain was told to use his full strength while pushing the knife down onto Tom Cruise's face so that it looked realistic. So Tom Cruise is really sitting there with a knife a quarter inch from his eyeball and really pushing against a man trying to stuff it into his eye. Like, it's just insane stuff that Tom Cruise wants to do. So I get why John Woo's nervous, but you can tell that there's a little bit of a mismatch in like expectations, and that ends up resolving later on in the franchise when it kind of becomes cohesive and there's stunts and everyone's kind of on board with what Cruise wants to do. All right, let's move on. So that's the one movie that like I don't like. And pretty much the next 5 movies, I played around with their positioning in this ranking up until I hit record a couple minutes ago. I think the next 5 movies are all very much on par and could really be placed anywhere on the list for different reasons. I have my reasons for placing them where I place them, and I'm sure as I talk, I might even feel like, man, did I mess up this ranking? Because I just think that they all have so much to bring to the table. So my number 6, and there's nothing, again, I really love this movie. I really love this movie. Number 6 on my list is Mission Impossible 3.
Rabbit's foot's in Paris. You want to know where in Paris? Then let her go. Because you will
It's
never.
not in Paris. 5.
I can get it for you. But you kill her, you do this. If you get nothing. Are you listening to me? The only way you're gonna get what you want is for you to. You think I'm playing? You think I'm playing? You don't think I'll do it? Where is it? Where the hell is it? Look at me. Where the hell is it? Look at me. Stay with me. 7. Kill you. I'm gonna kill you. I swear to God, I'm gonna kill you. 8.
Mission Impossible 3 came out in 2006, directed by J.J. Abrams. J.J. Abrams, a name you might recognize from the TV show Lost, as well as some of the new Star Wars movies and Star Trek movies. I think this movie has a lot that it brings to the table. Just right off the bat, this movie by far has the greatest Mission Impossible villain. It is played by none other than Philip Seymour Hoffman, who tragically passed away in 2014. Philip Seymour Hoffman is one of those guys that like has been in some of your favorite movies, and you probably don't know his name, but you definitely know his face. And when you watch a movie, you're always like, man, that guy's awesome. He plays that guy in Catching Fire and Mockingjay, who you'd think is a bad guy in Catching Fire, but really is a good guy. His name is Plutarch Heavensbee in those movies. He's in The Big Lebowski and Boogie Nights and Moneyball and The Talented Mr. Ripley, and he won an Oscar for Capote, and he's just been in like a ton of stuff. He's an amazing character actor, and in this movie, he is truly, truly frightening as the villain. Basically, the plot of this movie, not that it matters too much, is that basically we start off with Tom Cruise's Ethan Hunt living the civilian life, and he's taking a break from being in the field because of, I guess, of the events that take place in Mission Impossible 2. His job is really just to train new agents, and he basically is called back into duty to rescue an agent that he trained from the field. And when that doesn't go well, he's kind of pushed into this plot to capture an arms dealer who's played by Philip Seymour Hoffman, and that takes him on all sorts of adventures. And yeah, so like right off the bat, the villain is great. I love that they open this movie with Tom Cruise and Michelle Monaghan, who plays his, I guess, fiance, together at home in a suburban house party that they're throwing. It's like seeing a superhero like in his normal civilian life trying to hide the fact that he's a superhero. There's a part where he sees his fiance talking to her friends, and they're talking about some trip they took, and they're like, what's the name of that lake you went to? And she's having a hard time remembering it. And Tom Cruise, he's far away in the party, but he can read lips. And I keep saying Tom Cruise because it's Ethan Hunt, but I'm just going to say Tom Cruise because they're basically the same person at this point. Ethan Hunt can read lips, and they show him kind of reading their lips, and then he chimes in from across the room and says the name of the lake. And that ends up becoming another plot point they use later in the film, where another character realizes he can read lips and uses it to his advantage. All this stuff is just like great. It's not stunt based at all. This movie, I can't really even remember like if they did any crazy stunts. If they did, maybe it was CGI, maybe it wasn't. Either way, like the stunts are not big in this movie, which is kind of one of the big reasons I think it is lower on my list. That being said, like the action that it does feature is really, really fun. And it's still grounded in that classic Mission Impossible trope where someone up top in the hierarchy is betraying the rest of the team, and they kind of have to figure out who that is, or maybe they don't realize who that is until it's too late. They have some really, really great heist scenes, and I think the supporting cast is kind of slept on, and for the most part, except for Simon Pegg, who returns as Benji in the later films, none of them come back in later movies. You have, Ving Rhames, of course, is in this movie and returns. But Billy Crudup is one of the higher-ups in this movie. You have Michelle Monaghan playing his fiance. Jonathan Rhys-Meyers is part of the team. Maggie Q, who is like a gem of an actress and just like a beautiful person who we don't see anymore in movies. She's in this and she's great. And so, yeah, there's a couple like great little like Mission Impossible heist scenes featuring them. And so, yeah, I think like the last act of this movie kind of falls apart a little bit, which is another reason why I think it is not higher on my list. But overall, like as a spy thriller, like one of the more fun ones that came out in the 2000s. It's tough though, right? Because like this came out around the same time that the Bourne movies were coming out. This also came out the same year that Casino Royale came out. So when it did premiere, I think people were a little like, well, we're moving on from Mission Impossible, where we have these like really, really cool spy movies now, and this is definitely at the bottom of the barrel, which contributes to the fact that in 2011, when this kind of came out again with Mission Impossible 4, they really changed it up. They changed it up tonally, they changed up the action, and really focused on making these awesome set pieces and awesome stunt scenes, and that I think has single-handedly contributed to the reason that we still have these movies today. Alrighty. Number 5. This is where I'm keeping Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Spoiler-free thoughts here on this movie and why I have it at number 5. I think the first like hour and a half of this 2.5 hour movie is really, really fun. You have some awesome Mission Impossible set pieces. There's a scene in an airport where it's kind of like a triple chase scene through different parts of the airport, as well as this really intense scene featuring Simon Pegg's Benji. You have a huge kind of car chase, motorcycle chase scene that takes place in Rome. This is not a spoiler. This is all part of the trailer. And that whole sequence is just so much fun and is like, it's funny and it's charming, and it also features a lot of that like classic Mission Impossible charm where it's like action and then random like quips between the characters, and that's really, really great. You also have some like really, really fun new actors. Haley Atwell coming in, playing this woman named Grace, who is a thief that gets roped into all the Mission Impossible mayhem. And she's fantastic. She's really, really fun. I liked her in this way more than I liked her in any of the Captain America movies. She's incredibly charming and really plays a great like younger agent who isn't used to anything that they're doing, and it's just kind of like, what on earth is going on? Like, do you guys really let this guy do what he does? And they're like, yeah, it's best to just stay out of his way. And yeah, I think the reason it's not higher is because two main reasons is the villain and the big threat in this movie. I think the premise is amazing. I just think the execution wasn't great, and the last hour of this movie really is takes place in one setting and kind of loses a lot of that charm that the rest of the Mission Impossible movies above this one in the rankings has. And I think that having a lot of crazy things going on and resolving them in a sensible manner that kind of makes sense to the audience is a big reason as to why these movies work. And this one just didn't really have that for me. So I'm keeping it at number 5. I won't say anything more. If you want to learn more about this movie, if you watched it and want to hear more about it, or you're not going to watch it, you just want to learn more, you can wait till after the rankings or skip ahead using the timestamps in the description of the episode. But either way, that's all I'll say about this one. Okay, number 4, Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. This is the 4th movie. Came out in 2011, directed by Brad Bird, who is best known for animated movies. This guy directed The Incredibles and Ratatouille, as well as 1999's The Iron Giant. I love Brad Bird as a director. I remember being very excited about this movie when it came out because I loved The Incredibles and Ratatouille growing up. This movie is like responsible for a lot of things. It's responsible for making Mission Impossible the stunt-heavy franchise that we know today. It's honestly responsible for kind of reinvigorating it into pop culture. The key set piece here is most definitely the Burj Khalifa climbing scene, where Tom Cruise has to climb the Burj Khalifa to get into one of the higher floors. And then there's a whole kind of like disguise scene takes place in there, followed by an action sequence, followed by a sandstorm sequence that Tom Cruise is kind of like chasing the bad guy in. It features, I think, by far the best running in a Mission Impossible movie, and possibly Tom Cruise's best running performance. There's a shot of him running away from the Burj Khalifa and basically running away from a sandstorm, and it's just sick. Like, his knees get so high, and it's just like pure form. It's before Tom Cruise got to the point where you can tell that he's a little older. He still feels like a really young guy. You also have the addition of Jeremy Renner as William Brandt, who is the secretary of the team, an intelligence analyst, and later is revealed to be a former agent that has just kind of gotten moved to desk work.
Benji, you're not a technician anymore. You're a field agent. And you're just an analyst. Right? Right? Who are you really, Brandt? What are you asking? What am I asking? All right, let me see if I can put it another way. How does an agent with skills like that end up an analyst? Well, we all have our secrets. Tell me, Ethan.
And I thought that was great because Jeremy Renner was at the time like a really hot stock. He was about to be in the Avengers. He was in the Bourne Legacy, I think, in the same year. And he looks good. He's young, and he plays a really, really great like double agent. He's a good guy, but he's still a double agent in the sense of like his identity. And all that was awesome. You have Simon Pegg returning as Benji Dunn in this movie. And he's now a field agent. He's no longer the guy behind the desk. And he brings like a humor and a charm to it that I think is frankly like missing from a lot of the other entries in this franchise, and I think they bring the perfect amount of him into this one. You also have like a good supporting cast with like Paula Patton and Lea Seydoux. You also have Anil Kapoor as a guy named Brij Nath, who's a media tycoon in Mumbai in like the final act. And I remember my mom watching this movie and getting mad that like they do him so dirty in this movie. He just plays like a horned up Indian rich guy, and then they just kind of beat him up. And I think it's like kind of funny. It sets up some really fun action scenes and just like fun, I guess, like tense moments. But yeah, they did do him dirty. Anil Kapoor is like an Indian legend. Like, I wish they showed him in a better light, but that's neither here nor there. Why is this in number 4? Why is this not number 1 if I like this movie so much? I think that everything leading up to the Burj Khalifa scene is awesome. There are some moments where I find that the tone of this movie is overly goofy. Like I like some of the goofiness. I think some parts it feels like you're watching like a Buster Keaton film, which I think is like purposeful, but sometimes was like really, really over and like almost childish. But regardless, everything up to the Burj Khalifa scene was really fun. The setup's great. And I think everything after that whole sequence in Dubai does not hit the same. There's one moment where Jeremy Renner's forced to jump potentially onto a bunch of spikes, but then he's kind of caught by Benji's technology. The lead up to that, like 5 minutes, is great, but the entire third act of that movie is fairly forgettable and just can't live up to the hype of the Burj Khalifa scene. The fact that like there is just one huge set piece in this and the rest of the movie is built around it kind of makes it slightly lesser than the ones that I have above this movie. That being said, though, like the opening to the scene where we see Ethan Hunt in a prison and we have Simon Pegg's character Benji kind of help him escape was just sick. Like I think that's one of the most underrated parts of this movie is like this opening sequence where he's running through prison and having doors close behind him and then having to fight people in prison. Very reminiscent of like newer television scenes and like Daredevil and stuff, but this one obviously has a much more lighter tone. All that stuff is great. I just think that like, yeah, the ending of this movie and really everything in the last hour was just unable to live up to the rest of it. There is a really cool scene in this where Mission Impossible is like known for its like, I guess you could say cheesy, but I think it's like really fun dialogue that they kind of like throw out about things that are going on. So there's a part in it where the secretary, right before he dies, says like, we're initiating Ghost Protocol, which is the name of the movie. And yeah, let me just play that clip right here.
So what happens now?
Now I've been ordered to take you back to Washington, where the DOD will label you as a rogue extremist and hang the Kremlin bombing on you and your team. Unless you were to escape somewhere between here and the airport, having assaulted Mr. Brandt and me.
Sir?
You would then illegally scrounge whatever material you could from a backup supply cache that I've overlooked, the same cache where your team are waiting for further orders.
Sir, you may want to
You will then disappear, and this conversation never having taken place, your intentions would be unclear.
I love it. This is like classic, Mission Impossible characters talking in code where they're like, I'm going to tell you what I don't want you to do, but really I do want you to do it. And it's just classic stuff. It's just really, really fun. Number 3 on my list is none other than Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. This is the 5th movie in the franchise, came out in 2015. The first one that's overtly written and directed by Christopher McQuarrie, although Christopher McQuarrie did have some like uncredited assistance on the 4th one. This one feels like the movies we know now, where it's like you have like 5 incredible action set pieces, 3 of which are like crazy stunts that Tom Cruise is doing, and the threat feels big. The reason it's not higher on my list, frankly, is that the threat doesn't feel big enough. It feels like a very like contained Mission Impossible movie. That being said, like here are some of the set pieces that go down in this movie. So it starts out with Ethan Hunt hanging onto an airplane, which Tom Cruise really did in real life. He's hanging onto the side of an airplane, and the airplane's taking off and goes into the air. And it's nuts. It's such a fun, exciting way to like open up the movie. Okay, then you have, you have like a fun action scene before this where Ethan Hunt is like captured and escapes with the help of Rebecca Ferguson's character, who is introduced here. But you have the Vienna opera scene where Tom Cruise is fighting this like huge guy on this right above the set of an opera. You have then him like trying to figure out which gunman to take out between Rebecca Ferguson and another guy, and then like escaping that whole scenario. And it's just like awesome stuff where it's like you know something's gonna happen at the climax of this musical sequence, and he has to figure out how to stop it. And it's all silent. There's no dialogue. It's just kind of told through great filmmaking and great action. Really, really great stuff. Next, you have this underwater vault that Ethan Hunt has to like jump into and switch out some chip in so that Benji can like walk into and out of this one facility. And that whole stunt is crazy. Tom Cruise learned to hold his breath for like 6.5 minutes. When he was filming, he had to do it for 4 minutes at a time, so he went over that to like kind of prepare. And it's nuts what he's doing in this movie. Is like he really was swimming in this tank and then getting kind of pushed around by a current. And when you're watching it, it's like edge of your seat, hold your breath stuff. It's insane. It's really, really awesome. Right after that, you have a chase sequence. And like, I think usually in action movies, I kind of detest chase sequences because they usually feel too long. They feel too complicated. You have no idea what's really happening and you're just kind of like waiting for it to end. But I watched this, I don't know, a few days before I watched Dead Reckoning, along with a handful of other Mission Impossible movies. And this one really stood out as like, you know exactly what's happening the whole time. You know where Ethan Hunt is, you know where the bad guys are, you know where the side characters are in relation to each other. So great like visual directing there. And just like really, really fun moments where the action stops and you have this comedic moment, then the action keeps going, you have more comedic moments. And then a great finale to it where Rebecca Ferguson like gets off her motorcycle, stands in the middle of the road, and Tom Cruise is forced to like abandon his motorcycle and like fall. And it's just like, it's great. It's like 10 minutes of like awesome action, and you can tell it's barely CGI'd and it's all on location, and we love that. We love that when action movies actually go film in Europe and random places in Asia and do the thing. I'll mention here that Alec Baldwin joins the cast of this movie as CIA director Alan Hunley, and by the end of this movie becomes the secretary of the IMF. And there's a moment where like they do the whole mask reveal and trick him and trick the rest of the government officials that they're talking to, and that whole sequence is fun. It's like back to back. Every 20 minutes there's a scene that I'm looking forward to watching in this movie.
Hunt is uniquely trained and highly motivated. A specialist without equal, immune to any countermeasures. There is no secret he cannot extract, no security he cannot breach, no person he cannot become. He has most likely anticipated this very conversation and is waiting to strike in whatever direction we move. Sir, Hunt is the living manifestation of destiny, and he has made you his mission.
There's no like wasted moments. The last kind of scene is probably the least of all of them. And I think like the climax of this movie just felt smaller than the rest of the movie, which is a reason why I discredit it a little bit compared to the final two movies here. But yeah, just like really, really fun action movie. I think that if Mission Impossible, well, I won't ruin it, but I think if one of the other Mission Impossible movies didn't come out, that this would easily be considered like top tier Mission Impossible. But alas, it is not, because I have in number 2, this might be surprising to some, I have the original Mission Impossible. So this is the first one. This is very clearly based on the TV show. A lot of the characters that are introduced here are straight kind of peeled from the TV show. This is directed by Brian De Palma, who for a long time was like in the conversation for like great American work. He still is, don't get me wrong. He's just kind of not a household name like he kind of was at the time. He directed Carrie, The Untouchables, Blowout, and of course Mission Impossible. The reason I love this one on rewatch, I rewatched this right before the movie as well, and like it's so crazy to see how much from this movie has persisted throughout the franchise, despite the franchise changing up so much. Like this is there's like one stunt that is done in this movie. It's not like an action movie per se. There is like a couple action sequences, but really not the highlight. I think the highlight here is the fact that this is like a pure spy thriller. It is one of the best spy thrillers I've ever seen. It starts out with Ethan Hunt and his crew trying to stop a rogue agent from stealing a CIA list that kind of tells the aliases of all the agents. And the mission fails when they realize that the team is being killed one by one by an inside man. Someone has betrayed the team. And basically, Ethan Hunt is left alone. He meets with IMF director Eugene Kittredge, played by, Henry Czerny, who reprises his role in Mission Impossible 7, Dead Reckoning, which was really fun. We'll talk about that after the break. And that whole scene is like so fundamental to how scenes are filmed in the Mission Impossible franchise. It's like slow burn dialogue where you have the camera kind of underneath the actors at an angle, and it just kind of like gets more and more tense until kind of there's a big thing where Ethan Hunt escapes the conversation. And the content of the conversation is really, really great because it A, reveals that Ethan Hunt is one of the smartest people you've ever met, and B, shows that like everybody thinks that they're one step ahead of each other the entire time. So Ethan Hunt is kind of looking around the restaurant and realizing that everybody in the restaurant are people that he just saw during his mission, and he realizes that the whole operation that they just did was just a setup to lure out a mole within the IMF. And because Ethan Hunt is the last one alive, his boss, Eugene Kittredge, thinks that Ethan Hunt is the mole.
Why was there another team
What?
of IMF agents at the embassy tonight?
I don't quite follow you.
Let's see if you can follow me around the room. The drunk Russians on the embankment at 7, 8 o'clock. The couple waltzing around me at the embassy at 9 and 11. The waiter standing behind Hannah at the top of the stairs. Bow tie, 12 o'clock. The other IMF team. You're worried about me. Why?
Well, for a little over 2 years, we've been spotting serious blowback in IMF operations. We have a penetration.
So now Ethan Hunt runs away. He's completely alone and has to kind of prove that he was not the one that betrayed the team, figure out who did betray the team, and try to avoid the bad guys and the good guys that are chasing him down. So you have the introduction of Ving Rhames' character, Luther Stickle. You also have the guy who ends up being the bad guy is John Voight, who plays a man named Jim Phelps, who's really like the secretary. John Voight's a guy that like you've seen in a lot of stuff. You probably just like don't know his name. He's just in a ton of movies. I'm not going to go through his filmography, but he's been kind of like a living legend for a while. But anyway, he ends up being the bad guy, and when basically Ethan Hunt thinks he's dead, his character comes back in the last act of the movie and is like, you know, I got out of there alive, actually. I just couldn't contact you because it wasn't safe. And when he's talking to Ethan Hunt is saying one thing. He's saying like, oh man, I'm so glad you got out. It's so clear that you're not the mole and that this other person was the mole. But then we see what Ethan Hunt's really thinking, and we actually see him putting together that John Voight's character, Jim Phelps, is actually the mole and the bad guy. And that's just great. Like, that's what this movie's about, is like people kind of subverting what they're saying and kind of leading each other in the wrong direction. You also have a lot more like character development for Ethan Hunt, where we just learn a little bit more about him. We learn how smart he is. We learn that he's okay taking large risks as long as he knows that he's one step ahead of other people. There's also a moment in this where he like does close-up magic, and that's something that we like never see in any other movie except for this one and the latest Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, which is just like one of the many ways that Dead Reckoning honors this original film, which I thought was great. This movie's like ending is a little like dumb. Like there's like this big helicopter chase scene, but honestly, when I watched it, I was like, I don't care. Like it dates it a little bit, sure, but the way they told this slow burn spy thriller was so refreshing to me compared to like seeing kind of like the same formula be used over and over. And I just love that like there are parts of this movie that every Mission Impossible movie uses. And I just think that shouldn't go untalked about. So I have this at number 2. I think it's pretty great. It's pretty flawlessly made up until like the last 20 minutes. Oh, how could I forget? There's one of the most iconic stunts ever in a Mission Impossible film is when Tom Cruise is hanging on a rope in a room with his body kind of like parallel to the ground, trying to replace a disk in a computer. And that whole scene is like so intense and so like, it's just a masterclass in like building tension for 20 minutes. No music, just action and like a little bit of whispery dialogue. And it's great. I think that they should get back to their roots in terms of like trying to do action sequences that don't rely on music and spectacle as much as they do just like good tense filmmaking. Which, not to say that it doesn't happen, but it's rare when it does. My number 1 movie on this list may not come as a surprise if you are familiar with these movies, but this is Mission Impossible Fallout. This is the 6th installment in this franchise that came out in 2018. Also written and directed by Christopher McQuarrie, who did the 5th, 6th, and 7th movies. And I think this is one of the greatest action movies ever made.
You had a terrible choice to make in Berlin. One life over millions. And now the world is at risk.
This is the CIA's mission. If he had held on to the plutonium, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
His team would be dead.
Yes, they would. That's the job.
It is the highest grossing film in the franchise. It grossed almost $800 million worldwide. Highest grossing film of Tom Cruise's career until Top Gun Maverick came out last year. This movie is fucking awesome. There's just no way to put it. It features a lot of the classic, like, I don't know who to trust thing that Mission Impossible features, but also has just some of the most impressive stunt sequences you've ever seen, as well as one of the few Mission Impossible movies to have a kick-ass third final act. It doesn't fall off after, 2 hours of this movie. It just keeps going and ups the stakes even more and dares to do stuff that like leaves you on the edge of your seat until the end. One of the most fun movie-going experiences I've ever had. Here are some of the stunts that Tom Cruise does. One of the most impressive things in this movie is that he like jumps out of a helicopter or a plane and does a halo jump. Not only does he do a halo jump, a cameraman does a halo jump right next to him, and Tom Cruise had to remain like 3 feet away from the camera at all times in the middle of the air while he's just free falling through the sky. And Tom Cruise did like 100 halo jumps before this, and that was considered a low amount of halo jumps to do. And it's just like a sick sequence. It's all done in one take, and it's just an awesome way to like jump into literally the world that they're entering in as the story unfolds. You have a really cool fight scene between him, Henry Cavill, and a man that they suspect to be John Lark, who is this like anonymous weapons dealer that they're trying to track down in the first half of this film. That all takes place in a bathroom and really is like reminiscent of some of the more hand-to-hand combat films that we've seen in the last 10 years, notably the John Wick franchise and the Raid movies. And so if you're into like hand-to-hand combat scenes in film, like the John Wick films, like I think like this one really features a comparable movie scene. You have the introduction of Rebecca Kirby's character here, who plays someone named like the White Wolf or something like that. White Widow. White Widow. And she's an arms dealer who they kind of like work together in this movie. And she's like beautiful and like really, what's the word? Like she just like is like very mysterious. And that's something that like, I think Rebecca Ferguson is like great in these movies because she's just as kick-ass as Tom Cruise, if not more kick-ass. I think Vanessa Kirby brings this like mysterious quality to this otherwise like bump, it's like heavy action. She's just like one of those people who wears this like white dress and walks around and you don't know what she's thinking, and she's great. So I love that they brought her into this.
I suppose it's better than John Doe. Is there another name you prefer?
Is there somewhere we could talk privately?
In fact, I like Lark. It's of a certain ring.
We don't have a lot of time.
I'll be honest with you, a man of your reputation, I was expecting someone uglier.
And don't let looks deceive. I'm as ugly as they come. Now, I'll be honest with you. Your life is in danger.
There is, I think, like, the second best Tom Cruise running in a Mission Impossible movie, but the best to kind of, like, use his running in the context of the scene in this film, where there's a part where Ethan Hunt is chasing after Henry Cavill's character when he realizes that Henry Cavill is a bad guy, and he basically, like, runs through, I think London, runs through, like, all of London, it feels like, and is on rooftops, and he does this stunt where he like leaps from a building to another building's roof, and in real life he broke his ankle during that stunt, and he kept going through the scene, and that's the take that we see in the movie, which is nuts. But really awesome running on top of buildings, and like really cool like helicopter shots of him running. And then the final act where he is flying a helicopter in like low terrain, and he really did that. He really like flew a helicopter through a bunch of mountains. It's just nuts, like what this guy trains himself to do for these movies. But okay, stunts aside, like let's talk about like what they bring in here. They have this whole idea of who is the bad guy and who's the good guy. They bring back the bad guy from Mission Impossible 5, but he doesn't even feel like the biggest threat. It really does feel like Henry Cavill is the biggest threat throughout all of it, which I think is so cool because like you have basically two different bad guys that are equally as dangerous, and like you both have to stop both at the same time, basically. And I think what really puts a cherry on top of this movie is the final act, where they're wondering why are we going to Kashmir to stop this villain? Why is he going to set off a bunch of nuclear bombs in Kashmir of all places? And they find that there's a medical camp where they're going to detonate these bombs, and they're like, why here? Why do they do it at these medical camps? And when they get there, they see Michelle Monaghan's character, Julia, which is Tom Cruise's wife that he kind of like ended the marriage with on amicable terms to protect her from the danger that he's always in. And we haven't really seen her since the third movie. She's in a little small scene at the end of Mission Impossible 4, Ghost Protocol. But this is the first time where like they just show up face to face, and they're both shocked to see each other. And Julia knows that Ethan Hunt is, part of the IMF, and she's with her new husband, and her new husband has no idea what's going on, and is talking to Ethan Hunt. And there's a moment where, as they're talking, Julia looks over and sees Benji and Luther and Ela Faust and like all these characters that she's very well aware of, and realizes that she's in danger because there's no other reason why all these people would be here. And it's just awesome. Then she like joins the action, and she's like, what can I do to help? And it's just like, you bring up the stakes because you realize Ethan could lose not only his own life, but could be endangering his ex-wife. And just really feels like grounded in what the franchise was all about when it started, which was like Ethan Hunt trying to protect the ones he loves and the people in his life. And it's sick. And till the last moment is like edge of your seat action. And then of course it's a happy ending, but it really feels like the world's going to end if he doesn't solve this. And this is the first time where it really feels like that. The threat in the fourth movie was the same. Like there was a nuclear bomb or a nuclear missile that was going to explode, and Tom Cruise's character like stops that. But this one is like, there is two nuclear bombs like right in front of you. What are you going to do? And yeah, I just think it's so much fun. If you haven't seen this movie, highly, 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 highly recommend watching this. You can watch it on Paramount Plus. Get a free trial like I did. Oh my gosh, I have to cancel that today. Wow, great reminder, Mihir. Cancel your free trial. But yeah, definitely watch this movie if you haven't seen it. One of the greatest action movies you will ever see. And yeah, just a complete staple in this franchise. Oh, another little like tidbit is that they recreate a scene that takes place in the original movie. And they have this scene where they pretend that a character is in a hospital room and has like one, and so they get the character to admit some stuff and give them some information, and then they press a button and the walls fall down, and he realizes that he's not in a hospital, he's just in like a warehouse, and they completely tricked him with masks and stuff, completely out of the first movie, which I think the first movie ended up taking it out of the TV show. But I love that like after 6 movies they were like, we're gonna open this movie with basically something that happened in 1996, and it's gonna be just as effective. That was a lot. That's basically where I'm at on the Mission Impossible rankings. I love pretty much all these movies except for the second one. If you haven't seen any of them, highly recommend checking out this franchise. It's super fun. But enough of that. Let's take a quick break again. And when I come back, we will talk about Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. One thing I just thought of as soon as I took a break that I wanted to just point out is that Mission Impossible movies feel like movies, but the only one that really felt like a film, if you want to think about movies like that, like movies versus film, you know exactly what I'm talking about, is the original Mission Impossible. It has like larger ideas of espionage and the Cold War and betrayal, and even has some like psychosexual aspects to it between Tom Cruise and the man who becomes the villain, his kind of supervisor, and the wife of that supervisor. There's this idea that like Ethan Hunt doesn't have good relationships with the women in his life because like a lot of them either die or betray him, and that's like explored in this one and then kind of hinted at in a couple other movies, but that's it. So that's another reason why the original Mission Impossible is so high. It has larger ideas than the rest of the franchise. But I digress. Let's talk about Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Yeah, I watched this opening night, or at least like when it opened for me. I guess that was, let's see, the 11th, Tuesday, July 11th. And I had a great time, man. Like, this movie is such a fun movie experience. I watched it in AMC on like their Dolby Digital, whatever, their big screen with like surround sound that literally shakes and vibrates your seat as you're watching it, which was really intense and fun. I think I want to just like walk through some aspects of the movie and then kind of walk through the plot and talk about what I liked and didn't like and my thoughts on things. So I think one thing that was really, really apparent to me, because I rewatched a lot of the Mission Impossible movies before seeing this one, is how much this is paying homage to the first Mission Impossible movie. I think right off the bat, like, you have the re-entrance of Henry Czerny's character, Eugene Kittredge. He played the CIA director in the original film and kind of reprises his role in this one. And him and Tom Cruise have a conversation in the first 20 minutes of this movie that was featured in the trailer as well, where he's basically saying, like, you need to choose a side and like, you can't just say you're working for the greater good, because that doesn't exist anymore. There's a lot of parties at play here, and it's filmed the exact same way that conversation was filmed in the first movie, really paying homage to that like tense conversational style that Brian De Palma introduced here. And I just loved that aspect of it. You have a close-up magic scene where Ethan Hunt and I think Grace, the character that Haley Atwell plays, are trying to like steal this key from one another, and they both do close-up magic to each other, and that is like overtly a reference to the first movie. You also have a reference to the third movie that I caught when watching this, that they have a scene where Tom Cruise is running through Venice, and he's running like behind a bunch of pillars. So you see him going in and out of these pillars and running. And that exists in the third movie's final act, pretty much like shot for shot. So yeah, I guess just like as a film that is acknowledging the fact that this is a long franchise and it might be coming to an end soon, I like the fact that they're like, hey, we remember where we came from. We remember those great movies, and we're not too far off from all of that stuff. Overall, like, I know I just listed this as the 5th movie in the franchise, so you're probably wondering, like, why was it lower, why not higher? A big reason to that is the villain, and how they kind of use the villain and how they built the story around the villain. I think so. The villain here is AI. If you don't know anything about this movie or you saw it, either way, the villain is AI. There is something that they call the Entity, which is this artificial intelligence experimental system that was originally designed to like sabotage other digital systems, but then went rogue and got a mind of its own and infiltrated defense systems and military systems and intelligence networks across the world. And basically now you have a ton, every country on Earth that has the resources is trying to somehow find this entity so that they can use it for their own goals. And of course, in ridiculous Mission Impossible fashion, to control this AI, this incredibly advanced technology, state-of-the-art, one-of-a-kind technology, if you have 2 matching physical keys that look like keys, and then when you combine them and they look like the Holy Cross, you can control the entity, which totally makes sense, and we're just going to brush by that as Mission Impossible does. So, you know, this movie opens up with a Russian submarine that basically is targeted by what we learn later to be the AI, where we see that the AI can add things to radars and remove things from radars. So the Russians see an enemy ship on their radar and fire at it, and it misses, and the submarine just disappears because the AI put it there and it was never real. And then, of course, gets hit by their same missile that they fired. It's like probably one of my least favorite intros to a Mission Impossible movie. Usually these movies open up with either Ethan Hunt getting some instructions from some random person, you know, like your mission should you choose to accept it, or there's this like huge action set piece. And this is neither. This is no characters that end up mattering. This just kind of shows like, here's what the villain can do and here's what they're doing. And so all that was like fine. I thought it was like pretty entertaining, pretty well done, but I did miss like seeing something that we recognized right off the bat. But, you know, they tried something new. I'm not going to discredit them for that too much. And then we get into like the first real like hour and a half of this movie that I personally just loved. So Ethan Hunt is basically tasked with retrieving a key from Ela Faust, who has been in the last 4 movies, played by Rebecca Ferguson, and there's a bounty on her head. And so he travels to the Arabian desert, where he basically fights alongside Ela Faust, and then as far as the audience sees, it looks like she's dead. It looks like she just dies. We later learn that Ethan Hunt told her to get away and disguise another woman as Ela Faust to make it look like Ela died. But that's neither here nor there. There's a really cool action set piece in the desert where it's like it feels like you're in a video game. You're like fighting in a sandstorm in this like abandoned building. There's like horses, and it's like calling to, I don't know, like Lawrence of Arabia, but they all have guns. So like, I don't know, it's just a really cool image to see. It was featured in the trailer, and like I wish that it was more of a part of the story, honestly, because I really liked that whole set piece. And then you have Ethan Hunt kind of return back to the CIA in disguise, and basically like knocks out everybody in the office except for Eugene Kittredge, and basically gets his real mission from Eugene Kittredge and talks to him. And Eugene basically says that, hey, this thing called the Entity exists, and everyone's racing towards it, and yeah, it's a big threat, but you should be helping us get it. And of course, Ethan wants to destroy it because it's too powerful and nobody should have it. And there's this whole little conversation between the two where Eugene Kittredge is like, how are you possibly going to get out of here? There's people coming here to capture you right now. And then Tom Cruise just turns around and he's wearing a mask that looks just like Eugene Kittredge. And he's like, oh, of course. And then it cuts right to the opening credits. Beautiful stuff. Beautiful, beautiful Mission Impossible franchise shit right there. That's like what I live for in this movie franchise. Watching this in theaters was like really, really fun. You have all these people like laughing alongside me. And that probably wouldn't be the case if I was watching this at home. I probably would hear groans from you guys, but no, that was amazing. All right. I love shit like that. Give me more cheese. Give me more cheese. I love it. Okay. So then, you know, we understand the goal here is to get the keys that control the AI. And right now they know where, well, I guess Ethan has one key that he got from Ela Faust in the desert, and now they're looking for the other key. They go to Abu Dhabi International Airport to intercept the holder of the other key. You get this like awesome cat and mouse chase between the CIA and Ethan Hunt and Grace, who's played by Haley Atwell, who's just kind of like this independent third party who was hired by somebody that we don't know at the time, trying to find this key. We also see that what the entity can do. We see the introduction of Gabriel, who I'll get to in a bit, but we see that like the entity can make Gabriel disappear on radars and cameras and basically make it feel like he's not there. And that was really, really cool. You also have Benji trying to defuse a nuclear explosive that knows that Benji's defusing it and kind of like makes puzzles so that only Benji knows the answers. And like all that was really, really cool, really intense. I almost wish that more of the movie was like that, where it felt really tailored to like screwing over people and what is closest to them. Very, very intense and fun sequence. And yeah, let's get to Gabriel. So Gabriel is kind of like the manifestation of the villain here. He serves the AI because he realizes the AI's power. Gabriel is played by a man named Esai Morales, who is a powerful terrorist and basically introduced as somebody who, basically the reason Ethan is an IMF agent. Gabriel killed somebody close to Ethan, I guess a friend or an ally, way back in the day, named Marie. And I think cops thought that Ethan killed Marie, and so he was basically offered a choice to either go to prison or to become an IMF agent. So of course he became an IMF agent. So basically like Gabriel is this guy that he knew once upon a time and hasn't seen since. Not ever mentioned in any other movie. This is also like the only backstory we've gotten for Ethan in terms of like why he became an IMF agent. And he's kind of this like ethereal person who just like is, I shouldn't say ethereal, I meant like ephemeral person who's like there but not there because the AI just hides him so well. My overall thoughts, he was fine as a villain. Honestly, like he ends up doing some heinous stuff which like makes him powerful on paper, but like I was just like, honestly, I wasn't sold that he could beat up Rebecca Ferguson or Tom Cruise. Like, I'm sure he's a fit guy, but like just his whole vibe, I'm like, you're too old. Like I like, there's no way Ela Faust, this like MI6 agent who has survived the last 2 movies, is dying to you in hand-to-hand combat. There's just no way. It just felt a little crazy. So yeah, I wasn't a huge fan of like the way they used this guy. That being said, like, definitely part of like a more intense plot climax in the middle, where he, of course, like, you get the whole picture as to like what he can do and why he's doing it, and then he of course like beats Ela Faust and kills her in this movie. But yeah, just not my favorite villain. And so yeah, after this like airport scene, they basically go to Rome, and there's like some chemistry scenes between Tom Cruise and Haley Atwell that I think were awesome. I think Tom Cruise doesn't have much chemistry with a lot of female actors, or actresses I should say, in any movie lately, but like this really felt good. I think they had some really, really fun sequences. I'd happily like hang out with them in Rome the entire movie, and I wouldn't be upset. But then you have car motorcycle chase throughout Rome that was just like a lot of fun. I loved the fact that he ends up in this small yellow car and has to like drive away from this like huge Hummer and a bunch of motorcycles. I loved the little banter between him and Haley being handcuffed and switching sides and who's driving, who's not driving. All that stuff is like just like some of the best stuff in the movie, I think. It didn't, I think it was a long chase scene, but it didn't feel long. I think it was like really entertaining, and it felt like things were constantly changing. The setting was constantly changing, and of course it ends in this electric way where like Haley escapes and then Tom Cruise almost gets run over by a train, and then he's like officially done with the chase scene. But all of that stuff is really, really fun. And then we get into like where they really, really like harp on the plot and try to make you understand what's at stake here. I think that this scene that takes place in Venice, where like all the characters, literally every single character besides Benji and Luther, who are the tech guys right now, everybody is in the same room at this one party and talking about like who Gabriel's saying, I'm gonna either kill Ela Faust or Grace Tom Cruise, you decide. But also it's like, who's going to get the key? And you have like these 3 different parties who all want the key. You have the White Widow, who is here with her brother, and you have Gabriel, and you have the IMF team. And honestly, like I just didn't. I wish that like I was talking to my sister about this movie like the night after I watched it, and she had a good point where she was like, in every other Mission Impossible movie, what makes it so fun is that like you have these moments where you understand the stake of things, but the mission that they go on ends up kind of weaving, and there's different objectives at different time, and they're not just going after one object the entire movie. And this is where I kind of realized that like this movie is going to live and die on these keys. These keys end up being like the key to unlocking and controlling the AI. And there's no other like side mission. There's no like, well, we have to go do this to this guy so that he does this for this guy, and then we get the keys at the end. It's literally like, let's go steal the keys. Let's go steal the keys. Let's go steal the keys. The entire movie. And so this scene in particular, when I realized that like this is really just going to be about these goddamn keys, this is where I felt a little bit like, damn, all right, this is the direction we're going with this movie. And I hope it's entertaining, but I guess that's just where we are. There's this whole thing where, you know, Gabriel is fighting Grace and beats her. I bought that because Grace is relatively inexperienced. But then he beats Ela Faust, and I was just like, all right, sure. You have to kill Ela Faust because you had to show that Gabriel is killing important women in Ethan Hunt's life. But honestly, like on paper, like Rebecca Ferguson is such a badass in these movies. Arguably, like the women in these movies are better fighters than Ethan Hunt at times. Like Ela Faust is better. Even like the White Widow, she's not a better fighter, but like she is pretty kick-ass, and we don't really get to see her fight that much in this movie, or at all in this movie. I was a little let down by that. I think Rebecca Ferguson in these films is like one of the best things about these later films, and it just sucks that she was basically not part of the film the entire time. I don't know what the motivation was for that. Maybe it's because she's doing all these Dune movies and stuff and she can't commit to anymore, but I don't know. Either way, a little bit let down by all of that. This is a good time to talk about another woman in this cast that was just an absolute kick-ass assassin, and that is Pom Klementieff. I didn't know much about her before this movie. I didn't realize that she plays the Mantis in the Marvel films. Obviously, she's in like heavy makeup, so it's hard to even recognize her. But like, she is unrecognizable character-wise in this because she is like a gung-ho, crazy assassin who is kind of very reminiscent of like John Wick villains, from what I understand about John Wick. She often fights like hand-to-hand or with the sword, and I think her like culminating fight scene against Tom Cruise in an alley is one of the best fight scenes in the movie, and she's just fantastic in it. So yeah, I think the women in this franchise are kick-ass, and I'm just sad that one of the main one is now dead and is being replaced by Haley Atwell, who's awesome, but her character is not supposed to be like a experienced fighter, and it's clear that she isn't, which sucks. So yeah, this whole complicated party scene, I'm like, yeah, all right, we have to go on the Orient Express because that's where the White Widow is going to, I guess, like sell off the key, and then Ela Faust dies, and then the IMF team decides to infiltrate the train, pretend to be the White Widow, and basically like sell the key to the buyer and hold on to the key later, blah, blah, blah. Ethan Hunt's mask doesn't work, and so he can't join Haley Atwell's character on the train. And so then we basically get this like final act that lasts close to an hour, where for the first 30 minutes of it, Tom Cruise is basically not part of the movie. It's really like Haley Atwell disguised as Vanessa Kirby's character, the White Widow, talking to Eugene Kittredge and trying to sell him this key. You also have the two like national intelligence characters that we haven't talked about too much, Denlinger and Dagus, who are played by Carrie Elwes and Greg Tarzan Davis. Greg Tarzan Davis was in Top Gun Maverick as a side character, and I like that like this is now like the Christopher McQuarrie extended universe where you have like these actors you've seen in his past movies just coming in for side roles. Another person who like does that is Charles Parnell, who is also in Top Gun Maverick as like John Hamm's right-hand man and is a CIA guy in this one. So yeah, the train is kind of like this amalgamation of different parties, and you have conversation between all of them, and then some action, but not a ton for a while. It's just like trying to understand the stakes and why Eugene Kittredge, for example, is here, and feels a little complex and long and drawn out, honestly. The main stunt in this movie that was marketed like crazy for the last year is the fact that Tom Cruise drives a motorcycle off of a cliff and then just free falls and then eventually parachutes. And the trailer was amazing, and I was so excited to see this in the theater. And the build up to it is huge. Like, you see Tom Cruise driving a motorcycle for a long, long time, and you understand that he's going higher and higher, thinking he's going to get closer to the train, when he realizes that he's like miles above the train and he has to jump because he has a parachute. That kind of leads to the shot where it's one take, or not one take, it's one shot, and you see Tom Cruise drive the motorcycle up the cliff, and you follow him falling down, then you follow him kind of from the other angle of him falling towards you, and then he turns on, or he activates his parachute and starts to float. And that whole thing was 25 seconds. And I was disappointed, honestly. I was like, I love this stunt. I saw all the behind the scenes footage of it. I saw all of the like hype around it and all the interviews of Tom Cruise talking about how he did it. But I couldn't believe the fact that like it was 25 seconds and that was really it. Like, I wanted so much more. That being said, like, his entrance back into the train from that was really, really funny. He like, breaks the window and just like randomly just shows up and didn't even mean to. And he's just like, Grace, oh my gosh, you're here. Are you okay? And she's like, are you okay? You just flew in through the window. So I like that, but I was just, I was let down by the stunt. I really wanted it to feel like, it did feel like a big thing, but like it felt like meta. Like, I was like, we all know that this stunt is coming, and it felt like you knew the stunt was coming, so you made us wait for it. and it wasn't much. Like, it really didn't play that big of a role in what ends up happening. So I don't know. I was let down by it. I'll say it. I just wasn't for me. The final scenes where Tom Cruise and Haley Atwell are fighting in the train are directly kind of paying homage to Buster Keaton's The General, a silent film where Buster Keaton essentially films a train chase for most of the film, and it's all practical effects. That's what Buster Keaton's whole thing was. There's obviously it's 1920s back then. There's no CGI, and he was really doing all these stunts. And all the things with the train falling off of the bridge, and the bridge blowing up, and it falling into the valley, and them kind of hopping up the train as it goes, all of that is like paying homage to The General. If you haven't seen that movie, it's good. It's a very like interesting way to understand what Buster Keaton was doing 100 years ago, and I like the fact that they paid homage to it. I just thought it was interesting. But it was just that. It just felt like a stunt and was cool, but at that point I kind of understood that like this movie is not going to be what I wanted it to be. It's not going to be like wrapping up this story, obviously, because it's part one, but it's also not going to be taking it in a new direction. It's not going to get away from the keys. You know, it ends with Ethan Hunt having both keys, and so we're going to start the next movie with him heading, I'm sure, towards the submarine that is underwater. And I've heard that he might be going to space in the next movie. That's obviously not confirmed. It hasn't happened yet. I'm sure we would know if it had happened. But like, I really hope that in the next movie they kind of have moments where it doesn't feel like they're just kind of going after one objective for the entire time. I want it to feel like there's other things at stake, and there's like fun moments and opportunities for them to kind of have fun. It doesn't feel like, I don't know, like in Mission Impossible Fallout, the world was going to explode, and I don't know how they can top that in terms of stakes. And so I hope that they're just okay with the stakes being what the stakes are, and kind of presenting it as like a fun action movie rather than it being so one note. So yeah, that's where I'm at. I liked it. I had problems with it for sure. I think it had a lot of fun moments in the first half, and the second half fell off. Really, really fun movie viewing experience. This was my number one movie of the year in terms of like anticipation, and it makes sense considering Mission Impossible Fallout being what it is. Definitely like it's not my favorite movie of the year yet. Like, I think Spider-Verse and I guess if you're listening this far in, I'll tell you, Spider-Verse and Past Lives are by far my favorite movies of the year. I think Past Lives is a masterpiece. I don't think this is a masterpiece. I do think that this is an important movie for people because it's one of the last relics of real action filmmaking, aside from John Wick and not using CGI. And Tom Cruise is 63, 62 years old now, and is only going to make a couple more of these movies before he's just too old to. And I think everyone should go watch these in theater while we still have them, because it might be in 20 years that we just don't get action movies like this anymore, where everything's, for the most part, real visual effects and not CGI. So yeah, that's Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning. I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. Go see this movie if you haven't seen it. Shout out to you for just spoiling the entire movie for yourself if you haven't seen it, but you're listening anyway. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed. Take care. I'll see you guys in the next episode of Video Village. Peace. Special thanks to my lovely girlfriend Krupa Patel for the podcast's artwork, and my good friend Kevin Cow for the music that you're listening to now. You can find more of his music on Instagram at Weiguang Beats. Thanks, y'all.